I won't bid." The rancher's voice echoed across the crowded square, silencing every whisper, every breath. In a world where a child's life was reduced to a few dirty coins tossed onto an auction block, one man's refusal sent shockwaves that no one could have imagined. His name was Silas Garrett, a man who'd built his fortune behind fences and solitude haunted by memories too painful to face. A man whose heart had grown cold from loss and whose walls stood higher than the mountains that surrounded his land. But on that day, when Silas turned his back and rode away from an auction that treated innocents like cattle, he had no idea that by sunrise, 50 former slaves would gather at his gate, bringing with them not anger, but hope. Not weapons, but the chance to reclaim humanity itself. This isn't just a story of survival or justice. It's about the moment when one act of courage lights a fire so bright that no darkness can extinguish it. It's about a community forged from lost unity, born from struggle and a single child whose life would become the symbol of a new beginning. So hold tight, because in the next 30 minutes, you'll discover how one choice, one single refusal, can rewrite the story of an entire town and just maybe inspire us all to stand when everything inside tells us to remain silent. This is the story of the loner rancher who changed everything. It's hard to imagine today, a time when the worth of a human life was decided on wooden platforms, stained with sweat, tears, and years of quiet suffering. Yet not too long ago, in towns just like ours, auctions weren't just for cattle or land. They were for people. Picture it clearly for a moment, a square bustling with townsfolk at sunrise, voices mixing in the crisp morning air. The auctioneer calling out numbers rising higher, each bid another scar carved into the souls standing silently on that platform. Mothers separated from children, fathers stripped of dignity, and children too young to understand why the world treated them as property. America's forgotten auctions are not just chapters in history books. They're silent testimonies of a nation's struggle to recognize human dignity amidst great darkness. In cities like New Orleans, Charleston, and Richmond, these auctions were a grim daily routine. In fact, historians estimate that more than 500,000 souls passed through the slave auction blocks of America's southern states, each carrying stories we can hardly bear to tell. But let me take you closer, beyond numbers and distant memories. Feel for a moment the fear and heartbreak of those who stood awaiting judgment, their lives measured in dollars. Consider the invisible wounds left not just on their bodies, but on generations that would come after, passed down through whispered family histories, never fully healed. These scenes, harsh as they were, revealed the fragile line separating humanity from cruelty. And yet, even in these dark corners of history, there were moments when someone dared to say no. When ordinary people, often at great risk, chose compassion over convenience, courage over complacency. One such forgotten moment happened in a small dusty town square that history never fully recorded, a town where men had grown rich buying and selling innocence. But on this particular morning, the richest man in town, a loner rancher named Silas Garrett, stood quietly in the shadows, poised to alter destiny. You see, Silas Garrett's life had been defined by loss, his heart guarded behind walls of grief and silence. He was known not for kindness, but for ruthless business deals, isolation, and an intimidating gaze that kept the world at a distance. Yet beneath that cold exterior lay a pain that mirrored those on the auction blocks, a deep, unspoken wound from losing those he loved most. When Silas turned his back on an auctioneer's call, refusing to bid on a child whose cries pierced through his hardened heart, something shifted. It was as if a single spark ignited a fire no one knew they desperately needed. His refusal wasn't loud, wasn't violent. It was a quiet rebellion, a profound act of humanity. But Silas's quiet no wasn't the end. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because what happened next, what came to his gate at sunrise, was a gathering unlike anything that lonely rancher could have imagined. 50 souls carrying not weapons or vengeance, but a fragile hope that maybe human dignity could prevail even in the darkest of times. So let's journey deeper together, not just into Silas Garrett's story, but into our own shared history, one shaped not only by the cruelty we left behind, but by the courage we find within ourselves to rise again. Imagine standing in a town square at sunrise, an hour that usually promises new beginnings and quiet hope. But here, hope feels absent. The air is heavy, not just with morning dew, but with the weight of humanity at its most fragile. The crowd murmurs quietly, uncomfortable, yet familiar with the scene unfolding before them. Their eyes shift, unsure whether to watch or turn away, as though ashamed to acknowledge the painful truth right in front of them. At the center of this heartbreaking moment sits a small wicker basket, barely noticeable amidst the harsh wooden beams, worn smooth by countless footsteps before. Inside, wrapped in torn fabric, lies an infant, no older than 6 months. His tiny fists wave helplessly, unaware of the price Petrarch is being placed on his future, on his very existence. The auctioneer's voice slices the quiet like a blade. "What am I bid for this child? Good stock, strong for fieldwork in 10 years." With each number shouted, something within the soul of the town quietly fractures. Men raise their hands mechanically, bidding as casually as if they were buying cattle or corn, yet their voices betray the emptiness behind their eyes. Women glance away, hearts aching in silent protest. This child, innocent and unaware, represents more than just another tragic transaction. He symbolizes a crossroads for the conscience of everyone present. But no one dares step forward. No one dares break the rhythm of the familiar cruelty they've grown accustomed to. All eyes slowly turn toward one man, standing apart from the crowd, a rancher whose wealth and reputation could effortlessly secure the child's fate. Silas Garrett, a loner, whose very name conjures images of power and isolation, watches silently. His eyes are tired, not just from years spent building his empire, but from an invisible burden that weighs heavier with each passing year. Ever since illness took his wife and young daughter 5 winters ago, Silas's heart has been encased in a quiet, protective silence. Silence he's convinced himself is strength. Yet as he looks at this baby, something deep within Silas stirs. In the child's helpless cries, he hears echoes of another voice, one he still hears every night, in dreams he wishes he could forget. For the first time in years, his heart feels exposed, vulnerable, a feeling he swore he'd never let himself experience again. When the auctioneer's gaze finds Silas, the murmurs cease. The town square holds its breath, expecting the inevitable. Silas Garrett always wins, always takes what he desires. The auctioneer prods gently. "Mr. Garrett, surely you'll bid on this fine specimen." Current bid is $35, but Silas doesn't see a specimen. He sees a child whose life deserves more than a dollar value. He sees a human soul whose innocence he refuses to tarnish with complicity. With quiet strength, Silas simply answers, "No." That one word, soft yet impossibly loud, echoes through the square, unsettling, something deeply rooted. Townsfolk shift uneasily, stunned, uncertain. They've witnessed something profound, though they hardly understand its meaning yet. Because what they don't realize is that Silas's quiet refusal has sparked something far greater than just confusion. It ignites a flame that will soon burn brighter than anyone in that town ever imagined. His silent defiance, his refusal to buy into the cruel machinery of his time, sets into motion a powerful wave, one that will carry 50 souls bearing hope, instead of chains straight to his doorstep. And as Silas rides away from that auction, he doesn't yet know that his journey toward redemption and the healing of an entire community has just begun. Silas Garrett was the kind of man about whom stories were told in hushed voices, stories filled with mystery and quiet reverence. In 3 counties, everyone knew his name, yet hardly anyone knew his story. On the outside, he seemed carved from the very land he owned, solid, unyielding, powerful. But behind the legend of wealth and influence was a man whose heart had been broken by loss, a man who had silently vowed never to risk that kind of pain again. Years ago, long before that pivotal morning in the town square, Silas had known joy. His life had once been filled with simple yet profound happiness, the kind of contentment that comes not from riches, but from warmth and love. His wife Abigail had eyes that sparkled even on cloudy days, and his daughter Emma possessed laughter that filled every corner of their humble home. But happiness, Silas learned, could vanish as suddenly as summer rain. One cold winter sickness swept through the valley, leaving in its wake empty chairs, quiet rooms, and shattered hearts. Silas sat helplessly by the bedside of those he loved most, holding tightly to their hands, begging fate for mercy. Yet fate remained deaf, taking from him first Abigail, then little Emma, leaving behind nothing but an unbearable silence that echoed endlessly through his soul. Grief does strange things to a man. For Silas, it built walls around his heart walls, strong enough to keep pain out, yet thick enough to trap loneliness within. Friends watched helplessly as he withdrew into himself, disappearing behind layers of solitude. His once warm eyes turned distant, his words few and carefully measured. He spoke only when necessary, preferring the quiet company of cattle and horses to conversations that reminded him of what he'd lost. His neighbors respected him for his hard-earned success, but pitied him for his solitude. They whispered among themselves, wondering how long a man could bear such isolation. But Silas wore his loneliness as a shield, believing that if he kept the world at bay, he'd never again feel the agony of losing someone he loved. Yet beneath that hardened exterior remained a flicker of the man he once was. The father who sang softly to his daughter each night. The husband who promised Abigail he'd always protect their family. It was this buried tenderness, nearly forgotten beneath years of self-imposed isolation, that had stirred so powerfully when he saw that child on the auction block. For Silas, the baby's cries weren't just cries, they were memories. Echoes of Emma's tiny voice calling out in the darkness, a sound he'd tried desperately to forget, yet could never truly escape. In that instant, standing at the edge of the crowd, he felt something inside crack open, a gentle but undeniable reminder that his humanity was still alive beneath layers of grief. Silas Garrett had spent years believing his silence was strength, his solitude protection. But that day, he began to understand something crucial. True strength isn't found in walls we build around ourselves, but in the courage to let others back in, to risk pain for the chance to truly live again. And though he didn't yet realize it fully by turning his back on cruelty that morning, Silas had taken the first step toward dismantling the walls around his heart, a step that would soon bring 50 unexpected souls, each carrying their own quiet strength right to his front door. In every life, there comes a quiet, fragile moment when we must decide whether to stand silently by or to speak up, even if our voice trembles. History often remembers the loudest voices, the grandest gestures. But sometimes the most powerful act is simply the courage to whisper no. For Silas Garrett, that moment arrived unexpectedly on a sunlit morning in a crowded town square. It wasn't a shout or a rallying cry. It was a quiet refusal. A gentle word spoken clearly and without hesitation, no. To those gathered around him, Silas's words seemed almost insignificant, at first puzzling even. But beneath its simplicity was a strength far more profound than any louder declaration could hold. It was the strength born from knowing exactly what he was refusing. He wasn't just saying no to a single purchase. He was saying no to a lifetime of complicity. No to the subtle cruelty accepted by his community. It was a refusal to continue numbing his heart, to pretend that the pain of another human being didn't matter. What makes a simple no so powerful? Perhaps it's because each refusal, each moment when someone stands quietly yet firmly against injustice, carries with it the hope that others might find the courage to do the same. It reminds us that our humanity is measured not by what we accept, but by what we choose to reject. Throughout America's turbulent history, quiet refusals have sparked movements that changed the course of entire nations. Think of Rosa Parks on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her quiet refusal to surrender her seat ignited a revolution. Or consider the abolitionists, ordinary people who said no to slavery, not with guns but with words, with courage, with the simple refusal to see human beings treated as property. Silas's refusal echoed those quiet revolutions. Standing apart from the auction's crowd, feeling the eyes of his neighbors upon him, he knew full well the cost of his choice. His decision would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. It would isolate him further, challenging the stability he'd fought so hard to build. Yet in that singular moment, none of those fears outweighed the voice within the voice, reminding him of the father he once was. The father who would have moved heaven and earth to protect his own child. By quietly saying no, Silas began dismantling the walls that grief had erected around him. He wasn't just rejecting cruelty, he was reclaiming something precious he thought lost forever, his capacity to care, to connect, to feel deeply again. It's easy to believe that changing the world demands loud voices and heroic acts. But Silas's moment of refusal teaches us something different. It shows us the immense power in quiet courage, the kind of courage that dares to face down injustice, even when standing alone. And perhaps more than anything, Silas reminds us that saying no is never truly about rejection. It's about affirming the worth of every human life. It's about standing quietly in the gap between cruelty and compassion, choosing kindness even when it's costly. Silas couldn't yet imagine the consequences of his quiet refusal, the community that would soon form at his gate, the lives that would be forever changed. But as he rode home that morning, beneath the weight of a single courageous word, something new had already begun to take root. Something hopeful, something powerful, something he would soon see clearly in the faces of those who gathered at his doorstep. Courage doesn't always appear bold and fearless. Sometimes courage wears a quiet face, a gentle strength forged in the furnace of unimaginable loss. Dina Ross was exactly this kind of courageous a woman whose soft voice carried the echoes of countless silent battles fought alone in the shadows. To understand Dina Ross, you must first understand the pain from which her courage was born. Years earlier, Dina was a mother whose greatest joy was watching her young son Isaiah playing beneath the broad branches of an old oak, laughter bright enough to chase away even the darkest clouds. But Dina lived in a world that denied her control over even this simplest of joys. One cruel afternoon, that laughter fell silent forever, as Isaiah was taken from her arms, sold southward to places she would never see, into a future she could never protect him from. The day Isaiah was taken, Dina's heart fractured. Her world fell into silence, filled only with unanswered prayers and whispered promises made to the empty air. Promises to find him, protect him, or at least to fight so that no other mother would know such heartache. As the years passed, the ache never faded. Instead, it transformed into a quiet determination, a fire that burned beneath a calm exterior, guiding every careful step she took. When Dina stood in the shadows of the town square watching Silas Garrett ride away, after refusing to bid on an innocent child, she recognized something in him, immediately something she'd known all too well herself. It was the quiet strength of a broken heart, the silent courage that comes only from experiencing a loss so profound it changes your very soul. But Dina's courage was not simply endurance, it was action. She'd spent years quietly building a network connecting people from all walks of life, those who'd lost loved ones, those who'd felt helpless in the face of injustice, and those who believed that hope could still prevail even in the darkest times. Her quiet determination had sparked courage in others, a gentle rebellion built not from anger, but from compassion, empathy, and resilience. In Silas's quiet refusal, Dina saw more than just a man stepping away from cruelty. She saw an opportunity, a chance to bring together people who'd suffered alone, creating a community bound by mutual compassion and understanding. Dina knew the power of collective courage, how it could transform pain into hope, isolation into solidarity. As Dina rode toward Silas Garrett's ranch in the soft glow before dawn, leading a small army of survivors whose pain matched her own, she felt neither anger nor fear, only purpose. Each step forward felt like healing. Each mile traveled a testament to the courage she had quietly nurtured through years of grief. In history, we remember figures like Harriet Tubman, who refused to let cruelty define them, ordinary people who chose compassion over fear, love over hate. Dina Ross was no different. She wasn't loud or dramatic, but her quiet presence radiated strength, a strength born from heartbreak, but nourished by the hope of a kinder future. As Dina neared Silas's gate, she knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew something else, something powerful. The courage born from her deepest pain was about to ignite something extraordinary, not just within Silas Garrett, but within everyone who gathered around him. When Silas Garrett awoke that morning, he couldn't have imagined what awaited him at his gate. 50 souls bound not by blood or name, but by shared sorrow and a common dream. Each had traveled separate roads marked by struggle and loss, Yet their paths had converged in a quiet, powerful act of solidarity. These were not warriors seeking vengeance, but mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters whose hearts carried silent scars of injustice. Look closely at their faces. See Joseph, an elderly man whose bent back carried the memory of fields he'd never owned. Beside him rode Esther, whose eyes held grief for children she'd never watched grow lost forever to markets far away. Then there was young James, his face youthful, but his eyes aged beyond his years, having witnessed far more cruelty than any soul deserved. Each rider carried a story too painful to tell, yet together their stories formed a quiet chorus of resilience and hope. America has always been shaped by communities like these people who find strength not despite their differences, but because of them. In small towns and crossroads, ordinary folks once gathered in secret rooms and quiet basements, uniting against injustice. They shared little beyond their humanity, yet that shared humanity became their strongest bond. Dina Ross, leading this diverse gathering, understood this truth deeply. She knew unity wasn't born from uniformity, but from empathy, from listening, from truly seeing one another. As they stood together at Silas's gate, their differences became their strength. They were former slaves, immigrants, and even neighbors who had quietly resisted the cruelty around them, all deciding together that silence could no longer protect them. Silas saw them clearly now, not just as a group at his gate, but as individuals whose strength lay not in anger, but in courage, a courage shaped by their quiet endurance, their unwavering belief that change was possible. He recognized something profound in their presence, the power of choosing to stand together despite every reason the world gave them to remain apart. This quiet community echoed historical moments across America, abolitionists meeting in candlelit homes, freedom riders traveling dangerous roads, ordinary citizens quietly sheltering those fleeing oppression. Each time, it wasn't similarity that bound them, but their shared belief that the dignity of one was linked to the dignity of all. Standing at Silas's gate that morning, this gathering of diverse souls didn't demand revenge or retribution. Instead, they asked something much simpler, yet infinitely harder. They asked Silas Garrett to join them in reclaiming their shared humanity, to build a community where differences were honored, where dignity was unconditional. Unity, after all, isn't simply agreeing or thinking alike. It's deeper, quieter. It's the willingness to stand beside someone whose pain you recognize, even if you've never walked their exact path. It's the courage to say, "Your struggle matters to me, even if I haven't lived it." Silas Garrett felt something inside him soften as he looked at the faces gathered before him. In their eyes he saw not only pain and struggle, but quiet hope, the kind of hope that rises gently after a long night, promising a dawn brighter than anything he'd ever known. At his gate that morning, Silas saw clearly that the community forming before him represented more than just a gathering. They were the quiet, resilient heart of America itself, diverse, yet unified, wounded, yet hopeful. And together, they were about to begin something extraordinary. In life, the most profound decisions often emerge quietly, not from moments of certainty, but from gentle whispers of doubt, fear, and hope mingling together. For Silas Garrett, the decision he faced that morning was perhaps the most delicate yet powerful moment he'd encountered since losing Abigail and Emma. It wasn't just a choice between helping or staying isolated. It was a choice between opening his heart again or protecting it forever behind walls he'd built so carefully. Standing before the gathered faces at his gate, Silas felt an overwhelming fear of danger or even death, but the deeper fear of caring again only to lose once more. Memories flooded him softly like an evening tide, reminding him vividly of those days at Abigail's bedside, feeling utterly helpless as he watched life slip away. He remembered the nights spent holding Emma's tiny hand, promising her protection he couldn't ultimately give. He had sworn never to feel that powerless again. Yet as he looked into the eyes of those 50 souls, each carrying their own quiet courage, he understood something he'd been running from for years. Isolation could never protect him from pain. It only dulled life's edges, muted its beauty, and kept him trapped in a prison of his own making. He had built solitude into armor, believing it would shield him. Instead, it had merely separated him from the very humanity that might heal his wounds. Quietly, Silas began to see his fear differently. Fear, he realized, wasn't weakness. It was proof that some part of his heart still longed deeply for connection. Dina's words echoed gently in his mind, softly reminding him that fear is simply love with nowhere to go. Silas understood then that his grief had never been about lacking love. It was about having love so deep that losing it felt unbearable. America's history is filled with quiet heroes who made similar choices. Men and women who chose vulnerability over safety, love over distance. Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, overcame personal grief to dedicate her life to others. Abraham Lincoln navigated profound personal losses, yet still chose to lead a divided nation toward healing. Each faced the fear of loss with quiet bravery, stepping forward even when uncertainty surrounded them. Silas stood silently at the threshold of this choice, and the morning sun gently warming his face. The gathered community watching patiently, understanding the weight of his decision. Could he risk the pain again? Could he bear the thought of caring deeply, knowing loss might follow once more? In the end, it wasn't certainty or courage that guided Silas forward. It was acceptance. Acceptance grief was inevitable, but so too was joy. Acceptance that true strength lies in choosing to love again, despite knowing the cost. In that quiet moment beneath a sky painted softly by morning light, Silas Garrett surrendered to the gentle truth he'd spent years avoiding. Life, in all its fragile beauty, was worth the risk. He stepped forward slowly, feeling the quiet strength of those around him, understanding for the first time in years that he didn't have to carry his burden alone. Each person gathered at his gate had also faced profound loss, yet had chosen to move forward together. Silas nodded softly toward Dina, and the others quietly acknowledging the silent courage they shared. His heart opened cautiously, but genuinely ready once again to risk caring, ready once again to embrace life fully, despite its uncertainties. And with that quiet, courageous step forward, Silas Garrett left behind the isolation that had defined him, joining a community that would stand together, proving that even the deepest fear could be gently transformed into hope. When faced with injustice, it's natural to feel pulled toward anger, to crave confrontation, to fight fire with fire. Yet history gently reminds us that the greatest victories often come not from the strength of our fists, but from the courage of our hearts, from our willingness to speak softly yet firmly in the face of cruelty. For Silas Garrett and the community gathered around him, confronting Marcus Webb would test this quiet courage like never before. Marcus Webb was known throughout the region, not just for wealth, but for a cruelty disguised as business savvy. His ranch was a fortress built on the fear and suffering of others, an empire upheld by pain, silent submission, and intimidation. Yet Silas knew deeply that violence would only breed more sorrow, creating wounds no one could easily heal. The challenge then was to find a different way, one guided by strength, tempered with compassion, power balanced by humanity. Riding slowly toward Webb's ranch that morning, Silas felt the heaviness of his choice. Beside him, Dina Ross moved silently, her face calm but resolute. They both understood that negotiation didn't mean weakness. Rather, it was a quiet statement of dignity, a refusal to become the cruelty they opposed. Yet beneath their quiet resolve lingered uncertainty. Would Webb even listen? Could a man who valued profit above human dignity truly understand the quiet strength of compassion? Historical parallels offered, quiet encouragement. Figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe had changed hearts not through violence, but through powerful words and moral courage. Silas took comfort in knowing that true strength sometimes meant choosing the harder path, the one less certain, less immediate, yet infinitely more meaningful. When Webb appeared, Silas saw clearly the face of cruelty, eyes cold with calculation, a smile devoid of warmth. The air grew heavy with tension, yet Silas spoke softly, carefully, choosing words that echoed humanity rather than anger. He spoke not from a place of accusation, but from empathy, a quiet reminder that beneath every hardened heart, however deeply hidden, lay the possibility for redemption. At first, Webb responded with suspicion, dismissive laughter ringing hollow against Silas's gentle sincerity. Yet even in that moment, Silas refused to let anger dictate his response. Instead, he quietly outlined an alternative one based on mutual understanding, an arrangement rooted not in threat, but in practical humanity. His voice carried not threats, but quiet reminders of shared human values: dignity, respect, the simple yet profound worth of every life. Around them, Webb's guards watched, silently, tension visible in their uncertain eyes. They had expected confrontation, shouting, even violence, not this quiet negotiation anchored in compassion and dignity. Silas's gentle strength confused them, challenged their understanding of power. Marcus Webb wavered, caught between pride and practicality, suspicion and the quiet power of empathy. Though he outwardly resisted, something had already shifted in the quiet spaces between their words, a seed gently planted, suggesting that perhaps another way was possible. In the end, Silas understood that negotiation wouldn't immediately dismantle cruelty, but it could quietly weaken its foundations. His words had sown quiet doubts, small cracks in a fortress built on fear. He knew the battle against injustice was rarely won swiftly or loudly. More often, it required patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of those willing to choose humanity over hatred, compassion over confrontation. As Silas rode back alongside Dina and the community, he felt neither victory nor defeat, only quiet certainty that the road they'd chosen, though difficult, was right. They had shown the profound courage to confront cruelty not with violence, but with quiet strength, a strength rooted firmly in the enduring power of compassion. When we think of victory, we often imagine grand displays of strength, triumphant cries, raised fists, bold declarations. Yet the greatest triumphs can sometimes be silent, their power lying not in domination, but in quiet, unyielding compassion. For Silas Garrett and the community gathered with him, victory would come in exactly this quiet form, a rescue achieved not through force, but through humanity itself. As Silas stood before Marcus Webb, choosing negotiation over confrontation, something remarkable happened quietly around them. Webb's men, hardened by years of following commands without question, began to see something they hadn't expected: strength expressed through quiet dignity, courage shown through restraint rather than force. Their eyes softened as they heard Silas speak, not in threats or accusations, but in words filled with empathy, quietly urging understanding rather than fear. Webb, momentarily off balance by this unexpected approach, hesitated long enough for the small group led quietly by Dina to move gently through the ranch unnoticed. Their hearts racing softly with anticipation, they located the child whose fate had brought them all together. The infant Samuel lay quietly, eyes wide yet trusting, as if instinctively understanding the gentle intentions of those who'd come for him. In the quiet moments of rescue, no guns were drawn, no violence unleashed. Instead, careful hands gently lifted Samuel from his place of captivity, wrapping him in warmth, not merely fabric, but the warmth of quiet courage and profound compassion. Each movement deliberate, gentle, symbolizing a powerful truth: even amidst cruelty, love could quietly triumph. Historical moments like these have long echoed softly through American history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quiet marches through Montgomery, peaceful sit-ins at lunch counters across the South. The calm, determined courage of freedom riders all spoke louder than violence ever could. They reminded us that lasting victories are rarely won through force. Instead, they come quietly, patiently, through the refusal to meet hatred with hatred. As Dina carried Samuel towards Silas and the others, waiting patiently, hope quietly blossomed among them, spreading gently, invisibly, until it seemed to touch every heart. Samuel's wide eyes met Silas's gaze, sparking something deeply buried within a quiet memory of another child, another chance he'd wished desperately for. In that silent exchange, Silas felt a soft yet undeniable healing begin, as if the quiet courage he'd embraced was gently returning something he'd lost years before: hope. They departed quietly, their presence a gentle yet profound challenge to a system that had long thrived on cruelty. Marcus Webb stood silently, realizing in that moment that the fortress he'd built wasn't shattered by force, but undermined gently by compassion, empathy, and quiet courage, forces far more powerful than he'd ever anticipated. As the community rode softly away from Webb's ranch, the morning sun gently lighting their path, victory was marked not by cheers, but by quiet smiles, gentle nods, and the silent gratitude reflected in each face. Samuel, nestled safely in Dina's arms, symbolized the quiet triumph they'd achieved not through force, but through humanity itself. Their quiet rescue had proven something powerful, something worth remembering always. Real victory doesn't need noise or force to be felt deeply. Sometimes the greatest victories whisper quietly through history, reminding us that compassion, humanity, and gentle courage hold strength far beyond what violence can ever achieve. Family is often seen as something given to us, bound by blood, defined by birth. Yet the most profound families aren't simply inherited. They're quietly, carefully chosen. They emerge from shared struggles, gentle acts of compassion, and quiet promises to care for one another, regardless of the past. This was the new kind of family Silas, Garrett, Dina, Ross, and the quiet community they'd created had chosen together, a family built not from obligation, but from the heart. Samuel's arrival at Silas's ranch marked more than just a rescue. It symbolized the quiet birth of something extraordinary. In the days and months that followed, Silas's once silent ranch filled slowly with gentle laughter. Shared stories whispered around evening fires, and quiet bonds formed among people who had once been strangers. Each day brought subtle yet profound reminders that family isn't defined by similarities, but by the quiet strength found in our willingness to stand together, gently caring for one another, even through uncertainty. Slowly, the ranch became known as Samuel's Village, a gentle tribute to the small child whose presence had quietly sparked profound change. Here, former slaves worked alongside immigrants and ranchers, their differences softly blending into a vibrant tapestry of unity. Silas's heart, once shielded by walls of grief, gently opened wider each day, quietly embracing the vulnerability that came with loving again. In Samuel's Village, conflicts inevitably arose, yet were always handled with quiet dignity and empathy. Residents gathered together, voices calm, eyes patient, always finding solutions not through force, but through understanding. They taught each other, and eventually Samuel himself, the quiet yet powerful truth that family isn't about perfect harmony, but about gentle resilience, forgiveness, and the continuous decision to choose one another despite differences. Samuel grew gently guided by countless pairs of caring hands. He learned not just from Silas and Dina, but from an entire community quietly dedicated to ensuring he'd always understand his worth not as property, but as a cherished member of a diverse and loving family. Each evening, as Samuel fell asleep beneath a sky softly painted by stars, he did so knowing he was loved deeply, not by chance, but by deliberate choice. In America's history, communities like Samuel's Village have always quietly existed, often hidden in plain sight, gently reminding us of what's possible when people choose unity over division, compassion over cruelty. Their quiet existence challenges us to see family differently, to recognize that true family is built on gentle daily choices to care, forgive, and embrace one another even when it's difficult. Today, as we remember the quiet courage of Silas, Garrett, Dina, Ross, and the community they created, let their story gently remind us that we all possess the quiet strength to choose love, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. Let their gentle bravery inspire us to reach out, build connections, and redefine family, not as something we're simply born into, but as something we gently create every day, with every quiet act of compassion. If this story has touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we believe deeply in sharing quiet yet powerful stories. Stories remind us of our shared humanity, our gentle strength, and the quiet courage within us all. And now I invite you warmly to watch our next video, a story even more powerful, quietly inspiring, and deeply human. Click on the screen and let your journey continue.